Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today we're diving into a story about breaking free from control. What would you do if choosing your family meant losing everything you've ever had? Stay with me to see what happens next. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. The realization didn't come all at once. It wasn't a sudden shock, no dramatic moment, no single truth that broke everything open. It came, piece by piece, small details, tiny inconsistencies, things that didn't feel right, until they started to connect. The CEO stood in the hallway that morning longer than usual. He wasn't on a call. He wasn't rushing to leave. He was watching. For the first time, not reacting, not assuming, just observing. The nurse moved with precision, every step planned, every action timed. The baby was lifted gently, carefully, but not by instinct, by schedule, by instruction. Tieu Lac stood a few steps away, close, but not close enough, her hands empty again, her eyes fixed on the baby. But her body, still, as if she'd already learned where she was allowed to stand. Something inside him tightened. Not anger, not yet, but awareness. She should eat now, the nurse said calmly, without looking at Tieu Lac, without asking, without needing to. Tieu Lac nodded slightly, too quickly, too automatically. And that was what broke it. Because this wasn't her, not the woman who had once held everything together with nothing but instinct and love. Not the woman who had fought through fear just to keep her child close. This was someone adjusting, someone stepping back, someone being moved. The CEO didn't say anything, not immediately, because now he needed to be sure. Later that afternoon, he went to his mother, not as a son, not this time, but as someone who had finally started asking the right questions. She was in the same place. Always the same place. Calm, perfectly composed, like nothing in the world could surprise her. "You've been busy," she said lightly, not looking up right away, as if everything was still exactly where she wanted it to be. He didn't respond to that, didn't sit, didn't soften. "Did you arrange the nurse?" Straight. Direct, no room to move. A small pause. Then, "Yes." She lifted her cup slowly, took a sip, unbothered. "Did you decide the schedule?" Another pause. "Yes." Still calm, still controlled. "Did you tell them to limit Tieu Lac's time with the baby?" This time, she looked at him, directly. "I made adjustments." Her words were precise, carefully chosen. Necessary ones. Silence, but not empty. Not anymore. And the arguments. His voice dropped slightly, not louder, but heavier. The distance. A pause. "Was that part of your adjustments too?" For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, not hesitation, but interest. Because now, he wasn't asking, he was seeing. "You're starting to understand." Her voice softened, but not with kindness, with recognition. His jaw tightened. "So it was you." Not a question, a statement. "I didn't force anything," she replied calmly. "I created the environment." A pause. The rest happened naturally. That hit harder than anything else, because it wasn't denial, it wasn't hiding, it was truth, clear, cold, unapologetic. "You're pulling them apart." His voice was steady now, but only because he was holding everything else back. "I'm showing you reality," she corrected him just as calmly. He laughed once, short, sharp. "That's not reality." A pause. "That's control." She didn't react, didn't argue, because she didn't need to. "You think love is enough?" Her voice dropped slightly, not louder, but more pointed. "You think you can build a life on emotion alone?" He didn't answer immediately, because part of him had believed that, still wanted to. "They're not weak," he said finally. Tieu Lac is not weak. And your child? She asked quietly. Is she strong enough to live in uncertainty? Silence, because that question wasn't simple. He looked away, just for a second, and that was enough. Because she saw it. The doubt, the crack. I'm protecting her, she continued, from instability, from risk, from you. That was it. The line, the one that couldn't be crossed. He stepped forward, closer than ever before. No. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't move either. You're protecting control. A pause, not her. The room fell still, completely still, because now there was nothing left hidden, no more layers, no more subtlety, just truth and conflict. Back in the room, Tieu Lac sat alone, the baby finally in her arms, but her hold tighter than before because she felt it too. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. Something had changed, not just around her, but between them. The CEO returned later, slower, quieter, and when their eyes met, she knew something had happened. What is it? Her voice was soft, careful. He didn't answer right away, because for the first time, he didn't know how. I was wrong. The words came slowly, heavier than anything he had said before. Tieu Lac didn't react immediately, didn't ask, didn't interrupt, because she understood. This wasn't small. I thought I was protecting you, he continued. A pause. But I didn't see what was happening. His eyes dropped, briefly. I didn't see what she was doing. Silence, but not empty. Not this time. Tieu Lac looked down at the baby, then back at him. And for a moment, there was something in her expression. Not anger, not blame, but something deeper, something harder. You didn't want to see it. Her voice was quiet, but clear. He nodded, because that was true. Another silence. But this one was different, because now everything was on the surface, everything was known. And the question was no longer hidden. If everything has been controlled from the beginning, if every step has already been planned, then what happens? When someone finally decides to break the plan, the confrontation didn't wait, it didn't soften, and it didn't give anyone time to prepare. That night, the house felt different. Not quiet, not calm, but tense. Like something was about to break. The CEO didn't go to his room, didn't sit down, didn't try to pretend everything was still under control. Instead, he walked straight back to the living room, where she always was, where everything always began. His mother looked up the moment he entered, not surprised, not confused, just ready. You came back. Her voice was the same, calm, measured, as if this was just another conversation, but this time it wasn't. We need to end this. His words were direct, no hesitation, no pause. A small silence followed, not long, but enough, because she understood immediately. This isn't something you end, she replied quietly. It's something you learn to manage. No. He stepped forward, closer, stronger. It's something you created. A pause. And it stops now. Her eyes rested on him, longer this time, studying, not as a mother, but as someone evaluating a decision. You're emotional, she said, simply, as if that explained everything. And you're controlling, he answered, just as simply. Silence, but not empty. Not this time. Back in the room, Tieu Lac stood still, holding the baby, listening, every word, every shift in tone, because even without seeing, she knew this wasn't small anymore. You think you can walk away from this? His mother's voice lowered slightly, not louder, but sharper. You think you can undo everything I've built? I don't need to undo it, he replied. I just need to step out of it. That was the moment something changed. not in him, but in her, because this wasn't defiance anymore, this was separation. "You're making a mistake." Her words came slower now, more deliberate. "Everything you have, everything you are, comes from this family." A pause. "And you're ready to throw it away?" He didn't answer immediately, because once, that would have mattered. Everything she said, everything she built, everything he inherited. But now, he saw something else. "I already lost something more important." His voice dropped, lower, heavier. "And I didn't even realize it." Silence. Real silence, the kind that doesn't move. Because now, there was nothing left to argue. "You're choosing her." Not a question, a statement. "I'm choosing my family," he corrected. Without hesitation, from the doorway, Tieu Lac stepped closer, slowly, carefully, the baby in her arms, small, fragile, but present. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt, because this wasn't her fight to start, but it was her life, being decided. His mother's eyes shifted, from him to her, then to the child, and for a moment, something in her expression flickered again, that same brief hesitation. But it didn't last. "You think this will last?" she asked, quietly, almost softly. "You think love survives pressure?" He didn't look away. "Only if you stop trying to break it." Another silence, but this one was different, because now, both sides had said everything. His mother leaned back slightly, her fingers resting calmly again, as if everything had returned to order. "Then go." The words came without force, without resistance. He didn't move, because it felt too easy, too sudden. "If that's what you believe," she continued, "you're free to leave." A pause, "But don't come back expecting anything." There it was, the cost, clear, final. Tieu Lac's fingers tightened slightly around the baby. Because now, this wasn't just a conversation, it was a decision. He turned, looked at her, not asking, not questioning, just seeing. And she nodded, small but certain. That was enough. He turned back. "This isn't your choice anymore." His voice was steady, not angry, not emotional, just decided. And then he walked, not rushed, not hesitant, just forward. Tieu Lac followed, one step behind, then beside him. The door opened. The air outside felt different, not lighter, not easier, but real. Behind them, the house remained, perfect, still, untouched. His mother didn't stop them, didn't call out, didn't move. But as the door closed, her eyes shifted slightly, not toward where they had gone, but toward what would come next. Because control doesn't always end when people leave. Sometimes, it just changes form. Outside, the night was quiet, the city still alive, still moving. The CEO stood there. For a moment, not speaking, because even now, he knew this wasn't over. Tieu Lac adjusted the baby in her arms, closer, safer. "We'll be okay," she said softly, not asking, not hoping, just choosing to believe. He looked at her, then at the child, then back at the road ahead. "I know." A pause, but not a confident one. Not yet. Because the truth remained, they had stepped out of control, but not out of consequence. And somewhere, far behind them, a plan that had taken time to build wasn't finished. The question wasn't whether they had escaped. It was, what happens next? When the person who never loses control decides she hasn't lost yet. The CEO finally realizes that everything happening in the house was carefully arranged by his mother to separate Tieu Lac from their baby and create distance between them. Filled with guilt, he confronts his mother in a tense and emotional clash, refusing to accept her control any longer. Despite her calm and calculated arguments, he chooses to stand by Tieu Lac and their daughter. With nothing left to negotiate, he makes the difficult decision to leave the family home, risking everything he once had. Tieu Lac follows him without hesitation, choosing their fragile but honest bond over comfort and security. As they step into an uncertain future together, it seems like freedom at last. But far behind them, his mother remains composed, hinting that her plan may not be over yet.